us where you are.
Yeah, I am in Sderot, the city of Sderot, which is very, very close to the Gaza border. And it is a city that has been turned into more or less a military city. Most people of Sderot have been evacuated. 80% of the city have been evacuated because Israel is preparing a ground offensive. And Sderot is one of the places where the military has some bases and where they're basically leaving from to go to the Gaza.
So this is the launch point, if you like. How did you say how far it is from Gaza?
A few kilometers. You can hear the booms from the tanks. You can hear everything that's happening in Gaza.
So the most obvious thing, the most obvious question for me is has there been a surge in activity? Is if you like the offensive underway, or is it just a continuation, a slow progress? Netanyahu warned us that the next stage was coming. Any sign of that?
It is absolutely coming. We've seen, I don't know, I can't count how many soldiers I've seen preparing to go to Gaza in jeeps, in convoys, and they are ready. 300,000 people have been mobilized, and many of them are here in Sderot. And we heard the defense minister also saying now that this will be a long and deadly war, but we will kill every single member of Hamas inside Gaza.
What do Israelis, both in the IDF and civilians, think about, and if they have time, I should say, or inclination, to think about the reaction of the world? Do they feel that the world is with them, or do they look like many of my viewers and callers to the show have been saying today? They've been looking at huge demonstrations taking place in France, the demonstrations in London. Many of them are sickened by it. Some of them are trying to defend it. We've even had one or two refuse to condemn what happened. What is the general sense?
I would say most Israelis believe that the world leaders are with them. You can divide it into two. You can divide the world into two: the leaders of the world and the people of the world. And I would say the leaders of at least the Western world are absolutely with Israel, ranging from the United States to the United Kingdom. Most world leaders stand behind Israel. You have of course, China, which is condemning Israel for its bombardment in Gaza. But you know, most Western leaders are with Israel. Then you have the people, which is a completely different scenario. You have huge demonstrations in France, in the UK, and even in Denmark. I'm half Danish. Huge demonstrations in support of Gaza, but many of them actually support Hamas. And we know that. We can hear it from what they're saying. First of all, they don't believe the atrocities that Hamas committed, despite the numerous and the overwhelming evidence, both from eyewitnesses, but videos, photos. They don't believe it. They think it's Israeli propaganda. Fortunately, the world leaders who are more responsible believe it because they've seen it. I've spoken to eyewitnesses who have described the atrocities committed by Hamas. So, like I said, it's divided into two: the people and, of course,
look, if we had been through this country, anything like that had happened in Israel last September, I think we'd all feel just quite shocked that there were people who did not believe it, that there were people who were prepared to support the terrorist group that activated it. And by the way, yes, terrorist actions, but, you know, effectively a state organised this to come in. And I think that's why your Prime Minister called it a war. But is there a sense when you talk to people, civilians, are they just dismayed about these protests, or do they just take it in, well, that's what it's like to be a Jew?
I would say for a lot of, well, again, we can divide it into Jews in the diaspora, and we can divide it into Israelis. In Israel, I can speak for the many people that I've spoken to. First of all, they always think that the world, meaning public opinion, is against Israel. It took a couple of days before sympathy for Israel changed into sympathy for Gaza. So people are used to it, and they are not. This is not their concern right now. They are united as a people. They're trying to eliminate Hamas, and everyone supports the ground invasion. I haven't met a single person who has said, no, we shouldn't go into Gaza. So Israelis feel like public opinion doesn't matter. They have to take care of themselves now. But Jews in diaspora, that's a whole different issue. You see all these anti-Semitic slur, all these anti-Semitic streams coming from different countries directed at Jews as if they're responsible for what Israel does. That is just atrocious. So no, they don't feel like they have any support, and they're very scared. I can testify. I know that for a fact. The people in the United Kingdom, for example, Jews are worried about what's going to happen. Are they going to get harassed now?
Let's talk briefly about that, because you're absolutely right. We've had a caller who very eloquently and rather sadly displayed why she has a sense of fear. The number of attacks, the anti-Semitic attacks, have increased. There's no question of that, quite hugely. I mean, do you just think this is sadly the repeat of a same old story, just on extraordinarily tragic lines and a scale we haven't seen before? Can the cycle of hatred against Jews be halted in the UK, be halted in Denmark, be halted in France?
It's, first of all, it's up to the leaders to stop this. It is up to the leaders to put measures in place to stop this, to outlaw, which is, it is, of course, already outlawed, you know, incitement to violence against Jews, but it's their responsibility to crack down on this. I'm not saying they should jail anyone who's supporting the Palestinians. That's not what I'm saying. But if you are literally calling for the slaughter of Jews, I expect police to be on the streets and jailing you, because it's incitement to violence. So I would say Jews are used to this. It's nothing new. But I think what we're seeing right now is so extreme compared to, let's say, 2014, when Israel and Hamas were also in a war. This is completely different. And I expect, unfortunately, it's going to get much worse. But again, it's up to the leaders to try and contain this hatred that is just spiraling out of control.
Just one final question, if I may, just before we go, and we'll be talking about this later, Jotam. Iran has sort of made threats through the UN that they will intervene if Israel essentially goes ahead with its next stage in Gaza. What are the risks of escalation, and is that a risk that the Israeli people are prepared for?
We're looking at I wouldn't say necessarily third world war, but something close to. If Iran enters this conflict effectively by mobilizing Hezbollah in Lebanon to fire 150,000 rockets at Israel, the United States will respond. They've already warned it. The United Kingdom will likely also intervene, which means that you have several governments, several key players on the world stage fighting against Hezbollah in Lebanon and effectively against Iran. This is hugely dangerous. I can't stress how dangerous it is. What's happening in Gaza is a humanitarian catastrophe for the civilians, and of course it's horrific for Israelis. But on the northern front, it's a whole different game. It's a whole different player we're talking about. And Israel has said it will turn Lebanon back to the Stone Age if Hezbollah dares attack Israel, which they have so far, but we're not yet at a full-on war between Hezbollah and Israel.